welcome to this webinar. My name is Dr. Varsha Rathod. Some of you know me and some of you don't. I have been at Palm Health as an internist and a rheumatologist, as well as a functional medicine certified practitioner since its inception in 2015. I am so excited to do this webinar because since COVID, I've had an increasing number of patients have sleep-related problems, which means I needed to do some research as well. So with that, I hope you had the time to read the little breakthrough that about sleep that I put up on the screen as you were waiting for me. Also, before I start, I do want to thank IFM for its slides and also Matthew Walker for his wonderful book, which I hope that you all will read. It is a must-read book and should be in one's library. So, please.
Share screen.
All right, if you haven't read Amazing Breakthrough, then
Should be.
yeah, all right, sorry about that glitch. So I'll let you read The Amazing Breakthrough. This is from one of the chapters that starts Matthew Walker's book on sleep, the amazing things that sleep does for your health. All right, the two books that really inspired me, about 2006 or 2007 is when I read Lights Out. It came out in 2000 by T.S. Wiley. Some of you know T.S. Wiley. She's the originator of the program called the Wiley Hormone Program, and was very instrumental in pointing out to physicians how much light affected hormonal metabolism. And more recently, in 2017, Matthew Walker came out with this book called Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. This is the book that truly inspired me. I no longer use Lights Out. He has most of the data in that book, in this book. Today's webinar is going to not talk about everything about sleep, but instead it's going to be focusing on these issues. Why and how do we generate sleep? What are the general effects of sleep deprivation? And while there are 100 and plus sleep disorders, I'm only going to discuss insomnia, sleep deprivation disorder, and take a brief look at something called fatal familial insomnia, only to highlight the importance of sleep and what happens if you really don't get any at all. Then I'll go on to discuss what we can do to help our sleep without the use of drugs. Again, I am not going to be talking about drugs in this lecture. How drugs can disrupt this pattern of good sleep, and what can we do at Palm Health as physicians to help you with your sleep. So without further ado, why we sleep. So sleep is so primitive an ability that plants do it, animals do it, mammals do it, fish do it, and it's across the board of human life, mammalian life, bird life, as well as fish life that we all sleep. Even plants do sleep. So with mammals within the brain, we have the ability when we sleep to learn better, memorize better, make logical decisions, recalibrate emotions. It resets our immune system. It reforms the metabolic state of our body. It fine-tunes insulin, for example, glucose regulation. It also regulates our appetite and food selection. So the less you sleep, the more you crave carbs, and the more you sleep, the better you can control your appetite. Then it maintains a really flourishing microbiome, not just in your gut, but also your skin and your nasal cavity, everywhere the microbiome lives. It's intimately connected to what we call the autonomic nervous system, which is the fitness of our cardiovascular system by helping keeping blood pressure optimal and keeping our hearts fit. Basically, what sleep does is it resets our body and our brain health. We cannot live without it. There are two factors that govern when we sleep and when we awaken. The first is the signal beamed into your internal clock in the brain, which is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this is chiefly controlled by light, and it's the circadian rhythm. And the second is known as sleep pressure or sleep drive. And this is managed by a neurotransmitter called adenosine. So to talk about your circadian rhythm, it's hard not to look at light. The electromagnetic spectrum is a very narrow range, as you can see, between 10 to the 6th and 10 to the 7th. Roughly, what we call as our camera vision is what we see here, VIBGYOR, between violet and red. Okay. Most blue light that the eye perceives is roughly between 400 to 500 nanometers. So there are two kinds of vision that we talk about. Camera vision is what the eye sees, and clock vision is predominantly blue, red, and UV light, which is perceived through a receptor on the back of your retina called the melanopsin receptor. Today, we're not talking about camera vision, we're talking about clock vision, because this is what resets our circadian rhythm. The human skin also sees UVA and UVB light. In 1998, there was a remarkable breakthrough in the field of science, but in biology, and that is the discovery of two genes. They were known as the clock genes, and they stood for two proteins, BMAL and clock. And what we've discovered with these two proteins is that it was responsible for maintaining the regulation of the human clock system. And this clock was found to be pretty much universal across the tree of life, from bacteria to humans. So that's truly amazing that we all maintain the circadian rhythm as long as we live here on Earth. Human clock vision is controlled by blue light that is seen in this circadian fashion. By circadian fashion, I mean as when the sun rises, that blue light hits the retina and it starts the signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which then says daylight has begun, and you start the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm doesn't change very much. What happens when someone is blind and they cannot see and perceive light? They can still maintain a circadian rhythm, and that's because there are other factors that maintain the circadian rhythm. The most common one is temperature, regulation of body temperature. Then it's the timing of food, initial social interactions, and when we have social interactions during the day, and many activities that we do during the day, which are fairly regulated, that can maintain your circadian rhythm. So it's not just light. The light is the Zeitgeber. That means it's the one which acts kind of like the atomic clock. It sets us right back to a very precise clock, whereas all these others are a little bit more looser clocks. That means it might vary anywhere between 24 hours and 15 minutes to about 26 hours. When light hits your eye, on the cell surface membrane is a fat called DHA. Some of you have done Boston Heart Labs and know what EPA and DHA is. These are common in fish oil, but the human body makes DHA. DHA is very, very important because it is what that receives this photic signal. And when it receives this photic signal, it then transmits that electricity or vibration to water, which then becomes the canvas through which the signal is spread through the brain to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So right off the bat, you can already understand that DHA and water are extremely important to maintain that circadian rhythm. So we call this the master clock. The master clock is the brain clock, which is controlled by blue light, and it's switched off by darkness. The hormone that manages this clock is called melatonin. And the receptor is melanopsin. So here in this picture, you can see when you have daylight hitting the eye, quickly the suprachiasmatic nucleus deep in the brain, close to the hypothalamus, registers it as a signal and says, okay, it's time to start the circadian rhythm in a certain fashion. And things like activity, food, or body temperature are also related to it. These also control the peripheral clock, as long as you're doing things in the manner of the clock. So if you eat at odd times, then these can disrupt the clock. So your peripheral clock should be synchronized to your brain clock. Every organ has its own clock, and technically they should be all synchronized. And often they're not. If they're not synchronized, it feels like jet lag. Focus on this, which helps you understand what I was talking about, the two processes of sleep. Remember, I told you there are two processes. One is the circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is the dotted line here, and it really never changes. Even if you don't see light, if you see other lights, it will remain the same, though the quality of the circadian rhythm changes. What changes, and we call that process C. What changes is process S, or what is known as the sleep drive. So this is a 48-hour sleep cycle, and at 7 a.m., as you're awakening, the circadian rhythm, few hours prior to that, has begun to drop its melatonin. But what the dot is showing you is really the rhythm pattern of the day, your wake cycle. What the dark line is showing you is the neurotransmitter called adenosine, which is rising as you stay awake, and it keeps on rising and rising till you go horizontal to sleep. And that's when adenosine breaks down. So this creates a sleep pressure, and we call this process S, right? So again, the sleep drive is driven by the neurotransmitter adenosine, and process C, the circadian drive, is mostly driven by light, but it's also driven by temperature, by food, by social interactions, and by certain regular activities that we do. Another way to look at it is to look at a 24-hour clock and look at the two hormones responsible. So in the sleep drive, the sleep pressure, that's the hormone adenosine. So here we are at 9 o'clock awake, and as we are awakening and staying awake through the day, adenosine rises in our bloodstream till it's time to go to bed. Once we go lay down horizontal, then it begins to detoxify itself, and the levels of adenosine start to come down. On the other hand, the opposite drive is a circadian signal. So the circadian signal starts to go up, 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 and as it reaches its highest level, that's when melatonin is begun to be released, and that's when you begin to sleep. So when these two are synchronized, when you can lay down and your melatonin signal, you haven't seen enough blue light, so melatonin is being produced optimally, then you can sleep optimally. So the urge to be awake then is driven by this short distance between when we awaken and the lowest amount of adenosine that we have. That's what keeps us awake. On the other hand, the urge to the overpowering sleep deprivation happens because your circadian rhythm stays the same, but your adenosine is constantly rising. So now we're looking again at a 48-hour cycle. Here is where you missed your chance to sleep. Okay, so your adenosine is rising, you're awake at 11 p.m. Let's say you're a resident on a 36-hour shift and your adenosine keeps rising. But because the circadian rhythm is keeping its own cycle, you can see that there's a weak urge to sleep when you reach the peak of your circadian cycle, right? And then again, when you reach almost that 48-hour point, the distance between adenosine, the high levels of adenosine, and the circadian rhythm is now perfectly ready for you to sleep again. And so you can crash. This is why when you don't sleep for a while, you literally crash. And when you crash, you go into NREM sleep. So let's talk a little bit about the kinds of sleep. So there are patterns of sleep. Not all of us sleep the same. You would think that everybody should sleep from, say, 9 or 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., but that's not the case. about 40% of us actually are morning larks. That means we get up around 6 to 7 o'clock, like routine, and go to bed between 9 and 10. And that's about 40% of the population. About 30% of the population are known as evening owls. These are the people that cannot get up before, say, 11, 12 o'clock in the morning, but they also stay up till about 1 or 2 o'clock at night. And then there's another 30% that do a little bit of both. Society has put a lot of emphasis on morning larks. So jobs, etc., are based on morning larks kind of disposition. And this kind of puts evening owls or equally smart people at a disadvantage, and they're often called lazy. But today we're beginning to recognize that this is not so. And even with jobs, and we need to have this discrimination or not have this discrimination and decide who are the morning people and who are the evening people and place them in the job position appropriately so that they're actually awake in their job. Circadian disruption, this is a classic morning lark, where you can see their adenosine drive, their sleep drive came in early because they were awake early. Whereas in the evening owl, they get up much later. And so the adenosine peaks much later. So it's almost 2 o'clock before they can actually fall asleep. This is also a problem in marriage. So hopefully your marriage partner is equally a morning lark or equally an evening owl or somewhere in between. Before we go to how much sleep do we need, just a little bit about sleep patterns. So I didn't want to go deep into science here, but understand that let's say if we take a sleep pattern between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., that's about 8 hours of sleep. And you divide this up into cycles. We usually have 2 forms of sleep, NREM sleep and REM sleep. NREM is the deep, deep sleep, and REM is what we call dream sleep. And in that 8-hour period, we'll have roughly 5 cycles of 90 minutes of NREM and REM sleep. That's the usual human cycle. But the cycle is not all similar. That means when we first fall asleep, you'll actually have a lot more NREM sleep up front. And as the night goes on, or when you get into early morning, you get into more REM sleep. Why is this the case? This is partly evolutionary because your NREM sleep gets you deep into memory and taking your recent memory, archiving it from the hippocampus where it was stored, and transfers that data to the frontal cortex. So it's creating it into a more permanent memory, as well as taking out redundant memory. That's what NREM sleep does. So when you don't get NREM sleep up front, you don't learn very well. This is really important for you to know because as we age, one of the biggest things that happens is that we lose NREM sleep. You'll see that across the board, young adults will sleep a little bit more, but really most of us do need between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Coming to REM sleep, this happens more in the early morning, and REM sleep is kind of the sleep that puts you into sleep paralysis, but you're vividly dreaming. REM sleep is extremely important for mental health because it actually regulates our emotional output and input. It's actually regulating this in a very systemic fashion. So if you get proper REM sleep, you're more likely to be a person with high emotional quotient, person who's compassionate, person who's able to reason, person who's able to feel compassion as opposed to someone who's aggressive, or on the other hand, very anxious or depressed. What happens when we have sleep deprivation? The biggest area it affects is our cognitive function in the brain. It affects multiple other functions, but that takes time. The brain function is almost instantaneous. Cognitive impairment is the quickest thing that we can see. Memory lapses, even from one night of not sleeping well. impaired moral judgment, yawning, hallucinations. Hallucinations happen especially with alcohol or using substances that can help you sleep. It's very important to control the heart, the fine tuning of the heart. So your risk of heart disease also increases the less you sleep. Your immune system is impaired. You're more prone to infections of all kinds. It's one of the reasons why seniors who don't sleep well are more prone to gut-related infections presenting as urinary tract infections and sepsis. And that's because their immune system is impaired. They also have decreased safety because they have decreased reaction time and accuracy or tremors. It increases insulin resistance, so that puts you at risk for type 2 diabetes. Even when you're eating the same diet, you can start to gain weight. And it also does other things such as cause growth suppression and decreases body temperature or body temperature regulation, not really decrease body temperature, but decrease your regulation. So when it's really hot, you can't function. When it's really cold, you can't function. To put it graphically, here are some ways to look at sleep deprivation. Sleep loss and car crashes. On the x-axis here is the number of times risk of car crash and the hours of sleep. So as you have less hours of sleep on the y-axis, your risk of having car crashes goes up. And this is very, very well documented, whether you're a teenager or whether you're an adult. For those of you who love sports, look at NBA players. The horizontal line here and above represents those that get 8 hours of sleep, those players that get eight hours, and those players that get less than 8 hours of sleep. So those that get less than 8 hours of sleep, they have a 37% increase in turnovers, 45% increase in fouls committed, and they also have more prone to injuries. On the other hand, they have far more benefits when they actually sleep more. Sleep loss and obesity over the last 60 years, you can see the rising obesity curve. The dark line is obesity, and the dotted line is the average loss in sleep that you're generating. So here today in 2010, we are down to about 6.5 hours of sleep, as opposed to previously between 8 and 8.5 hours of sleep. That's right, insomnia, nom, 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 so it makes you want to eat. All right, let's come to sleep disorders now. There are over 100 different sleep disorders. Yes, that's true. There are 100 different sleep disorders: narcolepsy, sleep apnea, insomnia. Insomnia is divided into about 8 to 10 types. Sleep deprivation disorder. The ones that I'm going to cover are just these three here: insomnia, sleep deprivation disorder, and fatal familial insomnia. The reason I chose the top two, which these are the most common in medicine, but it was also the most common during the COVID pandemic, which is still ongoing, partly because of insomnia is usually caused by anxiety, worry, your sympathetic drive being increased. That's the most common cause for insomnia. And then sleep deprivation disorder is the exact opposite of insomnia. So to define first sleep deprivation is you have the adequate ability to sleep, yet you're giving oneself an inadequate opportunity to sleep. That means you're not allowing yourself the opportunity to sleep. Insomnia, on the other hand, is someone who has an inadequate ability to generate sleep despite allowing themselves 8 to 9 hours to get sleep. That means despite having adequate opportunity to get sleep. So they have really poor quality and quantity of sleep. There's also this thing called paradoxical insomnia, which is part of this insomnia disorder, and I do see it every now and then. And that is when I actually have them do a sleep study. Then you can see that they are actually, their sleep curves are completely normal, but they have a perception that they're not sleeping well. And this is because when they're in REM sleep and they're slightly awake, they remember that so well that they actually feel that they are awake. And so this is also a problem, and they need to be educated about it, because otherwise they'll keep seeking doctors' help and drugs for their paradoxical insomnia. And the only way to really discover this is by actually doing an EEG recording as part of the sleep study. Sleep deprivation during COVID happens because some of us had a little increased time, and so we use that increased time to do late night Zooms, late night Netflix, watching television more, or just putting off the sleep. So it's not that we're not able to sleep. We just didn't give ourselves the opportunity to sleep because we were so interested in doing other things. And that's not technically a medical disorder, but it's an opportunity for us physicians to get to educate our patients. I brought out this fatal familial insomnia because, one, it was relatively new to me. The newness was what it was discovered to be related to, and that was a gene defect in something called a prion protein. So we all have prion proteins in our brain, and some of them do some good work, but there's a rogue version of this prion protein that causes, in quotes, a viral-like spread that punches holes in targeted areas of the brain, especially an area called the thalamus, which receives all our sensory inputs. So when someone suffers from this, they suddenly stop sleeping, and it can happen in their 40s and 50s. They literally stop sleeping for a complete 24-hour period. Michael Cork was one person described in the UK who had such a sleep disorder. And apparently he lasted only 6 months, and there's nothing that one can do about this. So if you truly did not sleep, it is so detrimental to health that you can actually die. Now, that was the point I was making from it, not to scare you, but to make you understand the importance of sleep in regulating the human body and brain. So then when you have these different sleep disorders, what are our treatment options? The first one would be to manage blue light in the evening, and also in the morning when you're young. When you're young, you want to be, until you're in your 40s, it's really good to see your morning sunlight because it starts the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the circadian cycle going. But the more problematic issue is the continuation of blue light when the sun has already set. And how is that happening? It's happening with our TVs, mobile devices, computers, fluorescent and LED lighting. So if you can turn these off 2 hours prior to bedtime, it's really helpful. There are programs like iDotFlux, etc., that can help, but they don't totally eliminate the problem, and you need to know this. Turning down alcohol is also a very important treatment option. And let me talk to you about this extremely misunderstood drug. I have so many patients who tell me alcohol actually helps them sleep better. But let me clear that myth again. Alcohol is a sedative. There's a difference between a sedative, which is a drug such as alcohol or a sleep medicine, and the actual delivery of proper sleep with NREM and REM cycles. If alcohol is a sedative, I have patients often asking me, why is it that I feel so good when I drink with my girlfriends? Well, or men friends. The reason is its primary initial effect is in the prefrontal cortex. And what that means is it turns off your extreme inhibitions. So when you lose your inhibitions, you become a little looser on the tongue, you can talk more freely. And this is what they're referring to. They feel less inhibited and therefore more able to participate in a social context. But as the evening goes on and you drink more and more, that sedative effect goes to other parts of the brain as well. And slowly you start to get torpor, or you're just not able to control your body really well. And then off you go to bed. You're sleepy and in bed. So when the problem is when you sleep, you don't get the same sleep that you would do when you don't drink alcohol. But the alcoholic doesn't know it, because when they wake up at night, their sleep is very disrupted. Their sleep spindles are disrupted. But when they wake up, they're not aware of it. So they think that they're sleeping well. Secondly, as alcohol is metabolized into ketones and aldehydes, both of them actually happen to disrupt REM sleep, especially aldehydes. When you disrupt REM sleep, you actually develop a need. If you keep drinking alcohol every night, you actually develop an extreme pressure for REM sleep, and you can start having hallucinations visually, or mood changes, etc. And the extreme case of this is called delirium tremens, where you literally have so many hallucinations during your awake day because you need to get REM sleep. Right? So alcohol is not the panacea for sleep. It is not a sleep drug. Honestly, I don't want to sound puritanical, but in the interest of science and letting you know, alcohol does not help your sleep at all. If you really had to drink, the better time to drink would be 8 hours or 10 hours before you go to bed. I'm not recommending this, but honestly, if sleep were to be an issue, that's when you would drink. Talking about alcohol, you also need to know that this morning in the news, I heard that GI doctors in the last year have seen a 25 to 30% increase in alcoholic hepatitis and cirrhosis. And this was especially true in young women under the age of 40 during the COVID pandemic era. So not only does it disrupt sleep, but it's also affecting multiple organ systems and clocks in your body. Let's come to caffeine. Caffeine is a wonderful nootropic, meaning it can keep you awake, but it also does something incredible, and you need to understand it. Okay. I'm going to show you a slide next, and this is an esoteric experiment run by NASA. I don't know how they got spiders to get LSD, speed, marijuana, and caffeine, but they were monitoring a spider's ability to form webs. And this is from Matthew Walker's book. And you can see that LSD, speed, marijuana, all of them affected the spider's ability to form their web. But look at what caffeine does to the spider's ability to make its web. So caffeine is a blocker of the neurotransmitter called adenosine. And if you remember, adenosine is what causes your sleep drive. So if adenosine is responsible for the sleep drive, and caffeine blocks, adenosine is the key, and caffeine blocks the receptor for adenosine, you have these high levels of adenosine, but you're awake because you cannot sleep. This might be okay if you just drink 1 cup of coffee and you can metabolize it in 4 to 6 hours. But as your body ages or you get exposed to things, your metabolism for coffee might change. And I have several patients, including myself, who have noticed this, that drinking even 1 cup of coffee in the morning can keep me awake at 11 o'clock at night. So clearly that metabolism has changed and I just cannot consume it. And there might be many of you there who may not be able to. So you need to know this, to not drink caffeine all through the day, but instead be aware of what it might do to your metabolism and keep it to that morning cup in the morning. The other thing is, remember, temperature regulates your circadian rhythm. It regulates your circadian rhythm and changes the quality of it. So when you go to sleep, your temperature actually falls. So if you can keep your bedroom temperature around 65 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit, and keep your feet and hands warm, this will also help you jettison your body heat through your hands, feet, and your head. When you jettison that body heat and your body temperature falls, it actually gets you to sleep better. And so most people will tell me, oh my God, I'm uncomfortable. You're only uncomfortable for 2 to 3 minutes or so. And then, for me, my hands are usually cold, my feet are cold, so I need socks in bed. Do whatever it takes to get your feet warm. And then keeping my hands crossed on my chest gets my hand warm in a couple of minutes, and I'm able to fall asleep pretty well. Learn to sleep without an alarm clock. For many reasons, most people's alarm clocks are connected to an electrical socket, or your bed might be by an electrical socket, which releases dirty electricity or electromagnetic currents, which can disrupt your own sleep cycle. Another thing is there's often light associated with an alarm clock, which can disrupt your sleep. So that too can then affect it. I've seen incredible alarm clocks where the clock is lit up on the ceiling. So every time you awaken or got up from a dream, you're looking up at your ceiling. Not only are you seeing blue light, but it's reminding you, oh my God, it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you still haven't slept. And this is not really a good idea for you to get into your head that you're waking up at 2 o'clock, waking up at 3 o'clock. In 2016, the Annals of Internal Medicine had a very interesting article on sleep and the role of medicine in sleep. And particularly, they showed that almost all sleep medicines, this included benzodiazepines, Ambien, Lunesta, and even the more recent Belsomra, which was not out in 2016, but it has been subsequently been shown that it really does not change your sleep pattern. It might make you fall asleep easier, but it doesn't really give you any more time in bed. As a matter of fact, it actually acts as a sedative, just like alcohol, in that it actually decreases NREM sleep. So it's actually associated more with memory loss. And so you can't learn well when you're on these drugs. Secondly, they found that a form of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, if you put your patients through this, it was much more effective than sleeping pills. And yet most of us, including myself, don't know enough providers who can provide this to our patients. Sleep medicine doctors, a lot of them in St. Louis, when I send my patients, want to prescribe more and more medications. So it's almost better for us to find a psychologist who is Cbti trained to help you with your sleep. And the basic rules of Cbti is to establish regular sleep and wake times, go to bed only when sleepy, which is quite ironic. Especially the part that is ironic to me is never stay in bed when awake, because I was always told that you had to stay in bed and do anything you can to continue staying in bed. But the reason this works to never stay in bed when awake is when you wake up, let's say you cannot sleep for half hour, it's recommended that you wake up and do something relaxing. Don't use blue light. You can use a non-fluorescent light to read. You could do some knitting. You could do whatever you can that is relaxing, listening to some music. You could also use devices such as synchronized beats, binaural beats, or any of these things that can help you to resynchronize your brain. What this does is it actually starts to make adenosine rise because you're now awake. And when you reach a certain threshold of adenosine, you start feeling sleepy again, and then you go back to bed and get sleep. While you're having difficulty sleeping, it's really important to avoid daytime napping. Though if you don't have a sleep problem, up to 20 minutes of daytime napping is actually good. Reduce anxiety and the sympathetic overdrive by multiple techniques that you can learn, breathing techniques, meditation, and then remove visible clocks and clock watching anxiety. I also added adequate hydration and eating a non-inflammatory diet, because helping the brain also helps neuronal circuits. And also cutting sugar consumption late at night is extremely important, as is eating desserts with chocolate, because chocolate is also a neurotransmitter, just like caffeine. So here's a chart from a study from UCLA showing the risk of sleeping pills and death, which I just learned about. And this is the odd risks of death, 1x, 2x, 3x, 4x, etc. And in the bottom where how many pills, any kind of these sleeping pills that you used in a given year. So in those patients that used sleeping pills 132 days of the year, they had a 5 times higher rate of death, and the death rate was from infections in older adults, also cancers, and multiple other diabetes and related complications. So the sleeping pill is really not the answer for most sleep disorders. Why does water and DHA replacement help? I did talk to you about this earlier. Light provides the photic stimulation, and the photic stimulation is captured by your membranes by a fat called DHA. So the vibration of light frequency is captured by DHA in its vibration, and then DHA transfers this to water. And so water is the universal conductor that then spreads that through the brain to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. All proteins in your body, especially the colorful proteins, they're called cytochromes, chrome colors, such as hemoglobin, porphyrins, and cytochromes are also present in your mitochondria, can interact with light. So at Palm Health, for example, we use laser. Some of you may have gone through laser treatment for injury, etc. And what that light does is it's stimulating your mitochondria to actually repair tissue. And it's doing it the same way that blue light might do to your melanopsin receptor. Here we're using red light and infrared light to actually engage these cytochromes to begin to repair. So some pearls of light then. Go to bed and get up at the same time. Try to maintain something close to this within 2 hours on the weekends. Why within 2 hours? Because it actually takes us 1 hour to make an adjustment. It takes us 1 day to make an adjustment of 1 hour, meaning to get back 1 hour ahead in your sleep. And this is especially true when you're jet lagging. Get some regular exercise every day, preferably in the morning, because it's known to improve restful sleep. But like everything, sleep, even water, food, there's a J curve. Too much exercise can actually prevent you from sleeping. Too much sleep can also prevent you from feeling awake. Too much food can make you not sleep well. So it's all about optimal relationships with all of these lifestyles. Get regular exposure to outdoor or bright light. And for seniors, especially in the afternoon. Before the age of 40, definitely see morning light. And if you can see afternoon light, it helps you postpone your sleep. Why afternoon for seniors? So I'm going to take a moment and talk to you about what the problem with sleep is in the elderly. And it comes to NREM sleep and its relationship to dementia and Alzheimer's. As we age, the electrical impulses that generate NREM sleep is actually located in the prefrontal cortex, right behind your nasal bridge. These cells actually undergo atrophy as we age. So we lose our ability to get that deep, restful NREM sleep just naturally with the aging process. Further, because of when you lose NREM sleep, what happens? What does NREM sleep? If you remember, I told you that it was very important in regulating how we take our memory and store it as long-term memory. It helps us remember, it helps us with cognition. So if you don't get NREM sleep, you don't actually recover memory well. So what happens to seniors as they do not sleep well? They start losing memory. What do we physicians label it as? Dementia, perhaps Alzheimer's type. So here comes the full circle. In Alzheimer's research, they're now beginning to find that the very neurons which control NREM sleep is where they have the most atrophy. there's no atrophy in the hippocampus, which is where we thought it would happen. Instead, it's in the prefrontal cortex. And that is connected with their loss of sleep and memory. And it's a circular situation. So Alzheimer's is not just type 3 diabetes or insulin resistance. It's really intimately connected to sleep, right? So learning how, teaching an adult how to sleep after the age of 60 is extremely important. And that since most seniors want to go to bed early and get up early, you want to break that cycle. And how do you break that cycle? You break it by having them go and see sun between 12 and 2 in the afternoon. So this postpones when melatonin is going to be made. And if you can postpone by 2 hours, then that 7 o'clock sleep becomes closer to 9 o'clock, and that early morning awakening can get better. This is, by the way, the reason why a lot of senior centers have early bird specials for dinners. And the reason is they know that these seniors go to bed early, so let them eat at 4 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon so that they can be in bed by 7. And really, we need to be breaking this. Keeping temperature in your bedroom comfortable, and by comfortable, I really mean it might be uncomfortable for you initially, but comfortable for sleep, which is somewhere between 65 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. You can dress warm if you need to. Keep your bedroom quiet and dark enough to facilitate sleep. Use your bed only for sleep and sexual activity. And I have to tell you a personal story. Since last September, I started watching a lot more Netflix, and I have one of those, beds that you can elevate. And I said, "Oh, great! I'm going to start watching Netflix on my computer on my elevated bed." And then I found myself increasingly watching it later and later at night because it's so darn addicting. And I had to literally tell myself to stop this. No longer am I allowed to watch movies in bed, because it actually fosters a kind of activity that you do not want to facilitate, right? So use your bed just for sleeping and sexual activity. Establish regular rhythms, whatever that regular relaxing rhythm for you is. For me, it's meditation, prayer, and there's a lot of science behind how you can manage your REM dreams. If you look and see, what did I learn today, or what do I not want to repeat that I did today, you can put that in your cognitive awareness, in your conscious awareness, as you go to sleep. And when you put that in your conscious awareness, you actually change the quality of your dreams in REM sleep to facilitate that. I also like relaxation exercises, such as imagery, if you're having difficulty with sleeping. A progressive relaxation kind of imagery, so you can start imagining that you're slowly falling asleep. Definitely keep your hands and feet warm. Your head as well is usually warm. These are high capillary circulation areas, and so they can actually jettison the heat from your body. When you jettison about 2 degrees of temperature in your body, you're better able to sleep, because you're now telling your suprachiasmatic nucleus it's time to down that circadian rhythm. And then designate some time during the day when you have sleep problems to figure out the solution, not just sleep problems, even anxiety or business problems. What are possible problems, and what are possible solutions for the problems? So think about it way before, so that you don't perseverate about it at nighttime. What are some don'ts? Unless it's your routine habit, don't exercise before going to bed, because that can actually activate you. Don't engage in too many stimulating activities before bed, such as having caffeine in the evening, and that includes coffee, tea, and chocolate desserts. Try not to watch television in bed. Try not to use alcohol for 8 hours before you go to sleep, which is not the way we do it here. Try not to go to bed too hungry or too full. I personally believe in the old terminology, breakfast rather than intermittent fasting. So that means about a 12-hour period every day, every 24-hour period that you don't eat. At least have a 12-hour period. So for me, that's usually 6 to 6 or 7 to 7 that I do not eat. And by 10, if I go to bed by 11 on the weekends, I do feel a little hungry, but it's actually a pleasant hunger. And that hunger doesn't prevent me from falling asleep. But if I skip a meal, let's say I had a migraine, went to bed early and skip a meal, now that's gnawing hunger that'll wake me up at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, literally out of my sleep because I didn't eat dinner. Don't take another person's sleeping pills, or don't take any sleeping pills if you can. And if I'm giving it to you, talk to me too. This is just if you use it temporarily, it's one thing, but to use it chronically, it's not a good thing. Definitely do not take daytime naps if you're having problems with sleep. And if you do and you're not having problems with sleep, a quick power nap of 20 minutes can be very restorative. Don't command yourself to go to sleep. If you cannot sleep, get up and do something different, something relaxing without the use of blue light. Don't watch the clock or count minutes, or counting sheep, as they call it. Don't lie in bed awake more than 20 to 30 minutes. Remember, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. If you're beyond 30 minutes, get out of your bed, do something restful, continue to keep your feet and hands warm so you can keep your body cool. And whatever you want to do that is relaxing, which does not involve blue light, would be okay. Try not to succumb to maladaptive thoughts. What might these be? It's been 6 months and you and I have still not discovered why you cannot go to sleep, or there's something that we've just not figured out. Your brain is now going to tell you, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to sleep. That's it. I'm doomed. Don't I have memory problems already? Am I going down this pathway? Once you start that, it actually creates a post-traumatic response in you. Oh my God, you're never going to get to sleep. And now you're dealing with two issues. You're dealing with insomnia, and you're also dealing with a post-traumatic stress syndrome. You're going to have to deal with two disorders. Change your don't change your daytime routine because you didn't sleep well last night. Try and maintain the same routines that you can, because remember, these are the things that set your circadian rhythm. And most importantly, when you don't sleep, you feel like you want increased caffeine the next day, do your best to avoid it. Here at POM, we do offer some treatment options that I want for you to be familiar with. DHA is present in most of our fish oils. The highest source of DHA is in cod liver oil. If you're vegan, you can get algal DHA, and it's available very freely and is fairly potent and can help you. It's also very good for memory and also helps with early dementia and memory problems. Definitely adequate hydration. Drink a minimum of 64 ounces of water. We have several natural sleep aids. Melatonin is very useful in the elderly as you're trying to reset their NREM sleep and that early circadian rhythm where they want to go to bed early. It helps to give them melatonin to get them to that time of, say, 9 or 10 o'clock sleeping, and find the dose. Melatonin dosing is not a universal dosing. I was shocked to learn that about 85% of the melatonin sold over the counter actually does not have the right amount of melatonin in it. And I've also learned through actually T.S. Wiley, who wrote the book Lights Out, that melatonin has a very irregular rhythm in your body. Melatonin is actually reading night and day, but it's also reading your brain's perception of the seasons. That means the movement of the earth around the sun. So your needs for melatonin changes as the season changes. So think about it this way. When you have the longest night, that is winter, you will need the most melatonin. When you have the shortest night, which is the heart of summer, you will need the least melatonin. And then in spring and fall, that's your average melatonin dose of about 3 milligrams. Valerian and Kavakava, we don't sell them separately, but we have one called Botanical Calm, which has these in them. The multiple natural anxiolytics, if you feel like you're revved up, and these you can get without a physician permission. These are L-theanine. magnesium, and we have two kinds of it. One is called OptiMag, or PalmMag now, which is magnesium glycinate. And we also have magnesium glycinate threonate, which is OptiMag Neuro, and that's a powder, which is a little bit more effective for sleep. So these are available at Palm Health. And we also have something called Chinese Magnolia. Chinese Magnolia is fascinating to me. I've used it for over 10 years. And it's sold as something called Relora, the brand name Relora. And we have it in a supplement called cortisol. So initially start off taking one cortisol in the morning, and then if you need it, you can take another cortisol in the morning, in the afternoon. And what it does is it detaches you from the factors that induce stress. Definitely use blue light blockers such as glasses, blue blocker glasses, and also programs such as iFlux. And there are many such free programs available to you for your computers and your mobile devices. It'll help at least by about 50–60%. We also sell at Palm, which I didn't have here, devices that block EMF currents, the little triangular devices, and there are several of them out there. I personally don't know how the science behind them. I've read some of it, but I'm not fully convinced of this data, but you're more than welcome to try it and see if it helps you. If it does, whether it be placebo or not, it's still worth it. And then we also offer services at Palm, and these are things like cryotherapy, which helps regulate, and it's particularly good when you have jet lag. Biofeedback is another wonderful way of every 3 to 4 weeks. It helps more than 60% of our patients kind of regulate their sleep cycle. Cardiac coherence, also known as heart math, cardiac coherence and heart math is heart rate variability, is a way to teach you a combination of breathing and awareness of how you can control your sympathetic drive. Then we have what is called the pulsed electromagnetic frequency mat, PEMF mat, and that's used at multiple frequencies for different modalities, but at low hertz, it can be very helpful for sleep. And then biomat is also a form of electromagnetic current, but it's at a strict 5 to 7 hertz, and it's basically getting your cells back into frequency. So those are some really cool devices that we have. I'm now going to end this. And again, I would like to thank the IFM for their slides, and also to the two authors that I mentioned. And also another one that I really love is Health and Light by Mr. Ott, O-T-T. And it's a wonderful little skinny book that I've referenced in the last time I gave this talk about how plants and humans undergo light changes and how light affects us. With that, I am going to conclude this talk and take questions. I thank you so much for being part of this webinar today. Thank you.